It's the same thing as you get with like people who have particular standards of language and whatnot. People who talk about things like net speak or leet speak, polluting language or whatnot, and they don't seem to understand. They don't seem to understand how language works. That it is
Well,
this
those
protean
yeah.
thing
Often
that
the same people, if you can
transforms.
get a beer inside them, they start telling you how they can't stand plural pronouns as singulars, right?
Yeah,
And you're
it's
just like, yeah, yeah,
whatever.
language is your problem. Yeah, of course it is.
Language is your problem, particularly the English language. That's the irony. That's
What do
the
you know what I
irony. I
mean?
mean, anyone who tries to apply strictures and standards to the English language knows nothing about it.
Yeah, right. It's just like, dude, that's not even how any of this shit works.
No, if you think
For
there are
real.
rules,
Yeah,
I can give you at
you're
least
doing it wrong.
100 exceptions to that rule
Yeah.
in this language. It's insane. If you want to look at a rules-based language, then look at French.
Mm.
You know, look
Yeah,
at
yeah,
something like
absolutely.
French. Look at something. Look at one of the Latinate languages. Basically,
Yeah.
those derived from Latin tend to have very strict rules, and they function along very particular lines. So in French, there's a way of saying everything, and
Right.
you say it in that way.
Yeah.
There is no wiggle room. There is no changing the words about or shifting it here. In English, that you can structure language in such a way that there are a myriad number of different textural ways of describing the same artifact or the same phenomena.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
a
you know what?
strange language.
But also, just it's always been invented. I remember talking to Jack about this, and I can't remember the context, but I mean, Jack's a real kind of Shakespeare buff, amongst other
Mm.
things. And we were talking about. I think I was probably riffing on that thing that you'll occasionally hear bigots and idiots talk about the language of Shakespeare, as though it's some
Yeah.
holy sanctified thing. The idea that the language of Shakespeare is being abased by fill in the blanks, right?
It's irony, the irony. I mean, you
Yeah.
just go and look at what was being said about Shakespeare at the time.
Yeah, right.
I
And
mean,
also, but the other point that Jack made was like a lot of the words that Shakespeare used, he was inventing, and a lot of the
yes.
time, Shakespeare gets credit for inventing words that he probably didn't invent. It's
Uh
just he
huh.
was the one that wrote them down. Or
Yes.
when
Yeah.
historians go back, they just stop looking after they get
That's
to
it.
Shakespeare.
They're attributed to Shakespeare, and that's it. You know,
Yeah,
he's the
yeah,
most prominent
exactly.
figure. You know.
I mean, leaving
Um,
aside the fact that a lot of, I mean, not to be conspiracy theory about it, because Shakespeare did write a lot of his own stuff, but a lot of the
yeah.
plays of that era were co-authored as well.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Absolutely, they were.
um,
Absolutely, they were.
so you have different writers turning up in Shakespeare, and Shakespeare turning up in other, apparently other authors as well. There's a bit of
Hmm.
that going on. Like it's all there,
Yeah.
but yeah, oh, it's
I,
so
I, I
funny
f-
though.
I do find that hilarious when you've got, someone pontificating about the nature of language, particularly people who want to protect it, who
Yeah,
think that there's something to protect there, when there absolutely isn't.
no.
Every word you speak is this mongrel mouthful of so many different influences, they're actually impossible to disentangle.
You know what? I love it. For me, I find it's one of the things that I genuinely find delightful and hopeful. And I don't actually have a lot that I do on those days on these days, but
No.
the fact that the English language has that just almost infinite malleability,
Yeah, it's
and that
something
and that
I
playfulness, like it's always up for grabs.
Yeah, it is something I genuinely love about the
Mm.
language. It is something I genuinely adore, and not in some hideous nationalistic way. Just as, again, an artifact, as a phenomena, I find it fascinating. And the way
Absolutely.
that language shapes the nature of thought and the nature of the minds of those who speak it,
Mm.
it suggests to me that there is something about the nature of English that has the potential to produce incredibly poetic and interesting people, if only they'd allow it.
Yeah.
If only they'd all stop reading the fucking Sun and the Mail. If you want a perversion of language,
Oh,
there you are.
jeez.
There
Yeah,
you are.
absolutely.
And on the
Yeah.
other side, the fucking Guardian.
Which,
Which, okay, is nowhere near as bad.
no. Well, look,
Nowhere near as bad,
it's
but
what we've got. But yeah,
there
no, it's not.
are
Yeah.
I still won't read it. I still will not deign to pick it up. It's that pretending that I really hate about it. It pretends to be of the left, when in fact it's just as classist in its own peculiar way. Constantly denigrating lower classes
It,
and
you know,
appealing to an upper middle, you know?
it's. I mean, I hate to get all reductive about it, but it really, and I'm not an expert on Marx, so I might be wrong, but I think it really does illustrate that whole point about how, like, like class consciousness will infect everything. Like if you're, and it's middle class before it's left wing every time.
Yeah, every fucking
which
time.
means it's not really left wing at all. It's liberal.
Not at all. It's
know?
liberal, and there is a huge difference. It's something that people don't really understand, isn't it?
Well, this
on
is
like
it. I mean, that's where
level.
the American right propaganda machine has been so incredibly powerful. It's created the notion that liberal and left wing are the same thing.
Are the same thing, which they powerfully are not.
I mean, it's just baffling, isn't it? And it just, like, if that's your understanding, you haven't got a prayer of making sense of really anything that's going on in the world.
Well, to be fair, we are talking about a situation that has elevated Jordan Peterson as an expert on Marx, and then you watch him and realise that he's not read anything beyond the manifesto, and that and even that he's understood badly. So you've got people like Jordan Peterson who raise criticisms against Marx that Marx himself raises and punctures in his wider writings. And you realise that, like, you sat here in your little pit at home know more about Marx than this guy who's making millions off of talking about Marx. And you're like, yeah, you fucking fraud.
Well, and also, like, he claims to be so deeply kind of terrified of totalitarianism and so ideologically opposed to it.
What bullshit! I'm sorry. Whenever that he says anything like that, whenever he talks about totalitarianism, I always refer back to his idea of enforced monogamy and enforced sexuality for women, basically, which is what it is. I mean, what I want to ask him is, it's this whole notion that the problems of a particular white male underclass, which does exist, and is actually pertinent to what we're talking about tonight, actually.
We'll get there.
Does exist, but the solution, or one of the solutions he promotes, is that somehow if women give it up for them, that somehow that will fix all their problems, women and their magical vaginas, basically. And what I want to ask him is, by what mechanism do you want to do that, Jordan?
Yeah.
By what mechanism? Because the only mechanism I can see is totalitarian.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to make women want to sleep with people they don't want to sleep with. So what exactly do you have against totalitarianism again?
Yeah.
Oh, it's the fact that you've got to be polite to trans people in your professional place, yeah? That's what you fucking hate, isn't it? He's a nasty little weasel.
Oh,
Jordan
he is a nasty little weasel.
He really is.
But the other thing is, like, he claims to understand totalitarianism, and then he uses the phrase cultural Marxism, as though that's not a Third Reich talking point, as though that's not a classic anti-Semitic talking point
I know,
from the 30s. And it's like, dude, what like... And it's like, I don't know. He could be that ignorant, but if he is, he's got no business claiming he's an expert.
I'm really sorry, he's not.
And if he's not, then he's a fucking fraud.
He's not. He's not that stupid. He's been told. He, like a lot of the talking heads, he's been told 1,000,000 times that this hypocrisy or this apparent lack of understanding exists in his repertoire, and he still fucking uses it. So he's a fraud. He's a conscious fraud, and I have no problem pointing it out. In the same way, I've got no problem saying that Scientology is a nasty money-grubbing cult. It's the same thing. It's appalling to me that it really does say a lot. If you really want to talk about protecting language, the fact that we've elevated these serpentine snake oil salesmen, people like Ben Shapiro, people like Stefan Molyneux, people like Jordan Peterson, we've elevated them to this status, and that they dominate our discourses tells you a great deal about the standard of those discourses.
I think it goes deeper than that. I think it tells you a lot about the state of where we are, politically, and where we are, intellectually, actually.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing
really
that I keep coming back to, is just the sheer horror. Because I have this thing, like, I kind of assume if someone's declared as a public intellectual, I assume they do actually know stuff and they are actually bright. And part of it's, I guess, my own insecurities. I know my own education is, I'm almost completely self-taught.
Likewise.
And I'm aware that that makes me vulnerable to certain forms of academic argument, right? Because there's levels of schooling I didn't attain. There's levels, probably modes of thought I haven't fully engaged in, and there will be, massive gaps, right? Ignorances and pitfalls that I'm not really aware of. The amount of times I'll have a conversation with bright, educated people, and I'll describe something in great detail, and they'll turn around and say, "Oh, that's that." And sum it up in a phrase. Oh, yeah, okay, that is that. Yeah, that's okay.
Oh, it's
fine.
like
So
it's
that already existed. Somebody already thought of it.
Or,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or it's it's the notion of the simulacra. It's Baudrillardian or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, and that's fine, but I'm aware of those gaps. But as a result, I always kind of have this. Deference is perhaps too strong a word, but there's always a caution. There's always a thing. I'm kind of getting over it now, but I used to be really afraid of right-wing intellectuals, because you say, my God, maybe they're right. Maybe they know something I don't. In fact, they must know things I don't. And I'm going to listen to them. I'm suddenly going to realise everything I've thought is wrong. And then you do listen to them, and you really, a lot of the time I'm just left thinking, is that it?
Yeah.
Is that
right.
it? And it's like, it's astonishing to me. It really is. And I'm not saying that to big myself up at all. I don't think I'm any great shakes. I just think they're just vacuous.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just the lack of apparent knowledge, which is not a lack of knowledge. It's actually sedition. They're actually being consciously and deliberately serpentine. They're relying upon the ignorance of their audience and the fact that their audience are incurious, that they won't go and read wider and realise that these people are talking nonsense.
Yeah.
But also that the vast majority of their audience don't respond to fact. They don't respond to argument at all, really. What they're responding to is reinforcement. It's the chest pounding from the pulpit. It's exactly the same thing. It's why you've got Ben Shapiro being able to say, paramount idiocy. And I mean paramount idiocy.
Absolutely.
Peterson is one thing. Peterson is very good at giving the veneer that he knows what he talks about, I find. And then you go and do wider reading.
Let's be real about this. Peterson has done some reading. Right?
Yeah.
There's no question in my mind. And he's a PhD, and he's done some reading, and he's done some thinking. Most of it, I think, is half-baked at best. Yeah. And he strings together stuff he has no business stringing together whatsoever.
I can't bear it.
Spurious spade of twine. But
do you know what? It's when he starts talking about the stuff that he's an apparent expert in, like Jungianism.
Yeah, oh God.
He's a terrible Jungian.
He is, yeah.
He's a terrible Jungian. He doesn't understand what Jungian principle means. He just doesn't. Sorry, go on.
No, he manages to fuck up Joseph Campbell, and I hate Campbell, and I hate the fact that I find myself wanting to defend Campbell from fucking Peterson. Like, what is going on in my world? But you've got that. That's one thing. But Shapiro, my God.
Yeah.
It's just appalling.
It's just nonsense, isn't it? There is nothing that comes out of the man's mouth that actually means anything. It's just aggressive, entitled, little rich boy shit, basically. And he needs to be... What bothers me is that people don't tell him.
Right.
They won't just... This is something we have on the left that really bothers me. Why is it that they won't just say... Fuck off.
Yeah.
No. Here's the truth of the matter. Fuck you. Why am I even talking to you? Why do you have a place at the table?
Yeah, you do feel like there should be like minimum standards for engagement, shouldn't there?
And that's the problem, isn't it? That really is the problem. The fact that there aren't, or the fact that the right have created a situation where there aren't minimum standards. So you can actually have Priti Patel on Question Time being paid £1,000 an hour by a US military contract, saying, "Oh, no, there's no conflict of interest when this military power is bidding for contracts on British defence." It's like, "Oh no, there's no conflict of interest." Fuck you.
Yeah.
The minute she said that, she should have been ripped from her seat and fucking pilloried.
Well, you know what? It's one of the things that the last sort of couple of years in the UK in particular, political crisis is really. It goes under remarked in terms of the slip in standards that we've had, but I think it's actually incredibly significant. And part of the reason it's significant is because it has ramifications beyond the moment. But the level of kind of misdemeanor in office that you have to commit before you get the boot has just It's quite extraordinary.
Well, it's
like,
extreme now, isn't it? I
it's
mean, it doesn't
absolutely
matter. We've actually reached a point where it doesn't matter. I mean, we've got to the point now. I mean, we have Boris Johnson, who's unelected, an unelected prime minister who has been fired twice for fraud. You know,
but
it
like
doesn't matter now.
but
It
like,
doesn't matter. I mean, they've.
May would have gone. Any normal prime minister would have gone because of Windrush.
Yeah.
I mean, she was the Home Secretary when that scandal broke, and that was, that was a explicitly racist policy on behalf of the Home Office against British citizens.
Yeah. Right.
Because they had brown skin.
Yeah.
And any normal prime minister in any normal time who had been anywhere near something like that would have resigned immediately. In shame. And it just would have been standard, And it just, the rot set in before. I mean, Johnson obviously is kind of, it feels like an accelerant and in some ways a logical conclusion. He feels Trumpian in that sense, doesn't he?
I think he's the logical conclusion.
Yeah.
But also not of any kind of rot. I think he is the logical conclusion of the systems.
Yeah, maybe.
The systems are the rot,
Yeah,
the fact that they allow for this. I mean, Michael Moore made the point, and I'm not the biggest fan of Michael Moore, but he made the point about Donald Trump that he's the last president of the United States, and he's right.
Yeah,
he is the last president of the United States, one way or the other. But he's either the last in the sense that he's never going to go, and that's a very real possibility.
Yeah.
Or he's the last in the sense that the office has revealed itself as what it always was, which is this farcical seat for lunatics.
Well, I remember Rich Hall doing a stand-up comedy routine during the campaign and saying, it's a very exciting time in America because we're either going to have in Hillary Clinton our first female president or in Donald Trump our first last president.
Yeah.
And it was a good line.
Yeah. It's a good line, and it's true, but I mean,
it's scary stuff.
It's absolutely true, and you've also got the awfulness of the situation. You've got to choose between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump.
Yeah. I mean,
it's awful.
It is disgusting. It is.
It's a no-win situation.
Yeah.
It's a no-win situation. And it's interesting that America went for the one who was going to accelerate the decay of that entire system.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there's caveats, aren't there? I mean, he didn't win the popular vote.
No, he didn't.
There was some fairly serious bullshit around his campaign. Voter suppression's been an ongoing issue for a long time.
Looks like we're going to be getting a bit of that too.
Oh, those motherfuckers. Couldn't even believe that. Yeah. I mean, look, the good news about that is it's not going to pass this parliament.
No.
He's not going to get it through this time. But it does, I tell you what it does do, though. It does, I mean, the stakes for this coming general election that we've got, which is probably going to, I mean, it's going to be, December or January now, probably. There won't have been a high stakes election in our lifetime.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It decides for me whether I stay.
Right, I can understand that, yeah.
It decides for me whether I stay or whether because I'm so close to saying, you know what, UK, fuck yourself.
Yeah.
I don't care anymore. Bearing in mind I'm a carer.
Right.
in my professional life, I am so close to saying, fuck yourself. You are so intent on self-mutilation. You're so intent on devouring yourself. Collapse into the sea. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care if I go and pick grapes in some French vineyard for nothing and get housed in the sheds. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's a life that has some poetry. It's a life that has some meaning to it. It's better than sitting in the belly of this sick old man, watching him die and worship the cancer that's killing him. Yeah. Watching him smoke himself to death, watching him drink himself to death, because that's what the UK is right now.
Yeah, I mean, as ever, it's the same thing with America. There's two Americas, there's two UKs. America has a proud and noble tradition of resistance, of civil disobedience. The civil rights movement is an American movement and is a Southern American movement at that, and we should never forget that. And in the same way, the UK, we have our own kind of we have our own tradition of resistance. We have the Battle of Cable Street. We have spotted but mainly proud Union history. You know, we have things that we, you know, there's always two narratives in a nation, at least two. There's more than that, but you know, in terms of political narratives, there's still time. There's still time for us to be the thing we could be instead of the thing we are.
There's time, yeah.
And there's leadership there in a way that hasn't been. And
it requires faith as well. I mean, it requires a degree of faith, and that's a difficult one for me.
No, I understand that completely.
It's a difficult one for me right now. It really is.
But like, look, I mean, in terms of, I can speak a little bit to internal Labour Party politics because I've been a member of the party for about 10 years now, and I've seen three leaders come and go in that time. I joined under Brown.
Yeah.
So I've seen, and the culture inside the party is utterly unlike anything it's ever been before. There's a real sense of a lot of the language that has been paid lip service to for a long time has finally become something real, something vital, something living. It's quite astonishing. It's quite humbling to be part of. And a lot of that's just down to the sheer amount of membership now. The fact that we've got this huge numbers of people. It's not a mass movement yet, but it's a nauseous mass movement. It's a mass movement in potential. Now.
It needs more, doesn't it? That's
of course
the
it does.
problem.
We've got to keep
also,
pushing.
I mean, not only does it need more, it sounds terrible, but certain generations just need to start dying off. That would help.
They will.
That would help a great deal.
I mean, they are the age they are, and they will. It is unfortunate that this time around the far left, the not far left. I've got to stop using that language. The guy who would have been a centre left in any sane European democracy, but we call far left because we're bonkers.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just a shame that this time round it happened to be the old white guy. You know, if it had been, I mean, if it had been Diane Abbott again, maybe she'd have been able to ride the wave this time. Who knows?
Who knows?
But you know, I mean, I don't think John McDonnell would have done much better, to be honest. But we are where we are, you know, and you don't.
There are just certain factors within British culture that need to go. I mean, one of them, our media needs to be reined in.
Well, I mean, I got to admit, one of the things that I was really, because John McDonnell did a big sit-down interview with Alistair Campbell, which he's gotten an awful lot of shit for doing, but I quite liked it. And one of the things I really liked about that is Campbell asked him about the media, and he just said, Leveson 2 needs to happen.
Yeah,
there's a matter of urgency. And it was like,
and it needs to go through.
Right.
It needs to go through. There needs to be mass retrospective prosecutions.
Well, there's some of that. I also think, I think more importantly what there needs to be is the forward-looking path, which is about breaking up the media monopolies and pluralising the media landscape. I think that's the thing that McDonnell talked about that I was really, really impressed by, was a sense of like it's not just or even primarily actually about punishing the crimes of the past. It really is about saying we have to change the landscape for the future. It has to look different to the way it does now. You know, ownership needs to be spread far wider and far deeper. There just need to be more platforms. There need to be more voices. And I just thought, okay, that's really smart. You know, that's
it's
really
absolutely true. And the sheer unwarranted influence of things like the tabloids needs to be undone. It needs to be completely purged.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say on that though is they are dying a slow death anyway.
They are not enough, not quickly enough. There are still too many of particular generations who buy them and read them as their exclusive source of news in this country. Right.
Yeah, and that is a problem. But you know, I can always think back to the fact that the Mail completely emptied the silos at the last general election. You know, that terrorist sympathisers was the headline the day before the general election, and they spent 14 pages doing a classic Daily Mail hit job, the likes of which I have never seen, and I've seen a lot of Daily Mail hit jobs. And you know what? It didn't do what it was supposed to do.
No, but
it really didn't. You know,
but enough people do believe it.
Yeah. Well,
I've encountered them. You know,
I'm not sure enough people do anymore. That's the thing, because we're 2 years out. 2 more years of people who buy that paper who are old dying. 2 more years of people not buying that paper, and their circulation's gone down. You can see it. The figures are dropping month on month. The figures are dropping across the board.
It needs to be quicker.
Yeah, and we need to get. But the other side of it is that we just need to get we need to get every single young person we know registered, and we need to get them to the voting booth, and we need to actively campaign at those people.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's the young really. who really need to step up.
The kids could save us all, man. They really could.
Yeah.
And look, we've got no. To be fair, we've got no right to demand that they do that because
of course we
haven't laid the path for them, have we? We haven't made it easy for them. But out of sheer naked, self-interested altruism, they might come to the rescue.
They very
of us
well
all.
might. I just sincerely hope so. I really do. I mean, I balk at the insanity of a country that still buys the Sun in the numbers that it does after Hillsborough. I can't. I still know people who buy it out of habit because their parents used to, and it's like the done thing. You go up the paper shop and buy the Sun. If I could convince those people that they are poisoning their minds, that it's like injecting liquid meth into their temples, I'd be happy, you know.
I tell you what I think about that as well, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit recently. I think one of the ways that the right kind of fools itself is I think a lot of people on the right, or even maybe even quite a few centrists, I think, probably fall into this trap. They think that they are somehow immune to being influenced by the media. I see it a lot. There's a lot of people on the centre and on the centre right who seem to really think, "Oh, I make my own mind up."
Well,
no, I absorb the facts to make my own mind up. And then you say, okay, but what do you read? Where do you get your facts? Oh, I read the Sun, I read the Mail. Well, then a lot of your decisions are being made for you before you've even picked the paper up. What to cover and what not to cover. What's the headline on a given day?
I'm very cynical when people describe themselves as centrist. I'm very cynical.
We've talked about that before, haven't we? Yeah.
Because it generally is a euphemism for right.
I'm right wing, but I don't want you to shout.
I don't want to take responsibility for it. You know, that is generally the way, isn't it? Which does, I suppose, in many respects, almost everything we've spoken about feeds in quite nicely to what we're here to actually talk about this evening.
It's true, yeah.
It does, because I mean, all of these themes, I mean, everything we've spoken about is here.
Yep.
Everything.
Oh my goodness, isn't it just?
Absolutely everything. I mean, even before the film came out, there were these political eruptions from all over the place, from right-wing sources, from left-wing sources, from just everywhere, saying that the film was this, that the film was that, that it could be interpreted thus, that it can be interpreted thus, that it might incite thus. And, you know, having experienced those preemptive interpretations, often it has to be said rather agenda-driven interpretations, I came out of the film thinking they're all wrong.
Yeah.
Every single one of them is starkly, profoundly wrong. To the point whereby I like, as we were talking about earlier, I like the likes of Jordan Peterson. I doubt their sincerity to that extreme. To that extreme. I found that the film addresses every complaint they have. It brings it up, sometimes subtly.
Yeah.
Sometimes in terms of symbolism or imagery or implication, but it's definitely there. And it leaves me wondering: is this an inability to is this a result of our inability to appreciate nuance in visual storytelling?
Well, I think there's a few things going on there that I want to unpack. I mean, to start with, I think it's worth remembering that a lot of the backlash started before the movie came out, and that is significant. Mm-hmm. I actually muted the term Joker movie on Twitter, which is the first time I've ever muted a term.
Wow.
And that's because I follow a lot of left-leaning and leftist commentators on pop culture in particular. Yep. And I was getting really disheartened by the sheer volume of bad takes I was seeing from people based on the trailer.
Yeah.
And it was really starting to annoy me.
Yes.
And I don't like that because there's a certain hypocrisy from me saying you shouldn't prejudge a movie based on a trailer, because I've done that. And I'm quite happy, for example, to talk at length about why The Passion of the Christ is a terrible movie, and I've never seen The Passion of the Christ.
Oh, you've never seen it?
No, I haven't. And I'm still quite comfortable based on what I've read about it and based on the trailers and based on what I've seen, I'm quite comfortable having an opinion on it, even though I haven't seen it. So it's quite hypocritical of me to be angry with others for doing that about the Joker movie, but I was. I was really annoyed. And I had to sense check it myself, because I wondered if what was really going on was that it was because I had this enormous attachment to the Joker as a cultural figure, which I do. There's no question.
Yeah,
as a pop culture icon, Joker's he's in my pantheon. He's one of my...
Yeah, likewise. When they announced they were doing a Joker movie, I was simultaneously... there was a part of me that was absolutely rapt. Yeah. I was just like, oh, please, yes, give me all of that. And then the other half of me was, this is going to be terrible, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Do not fuck this up, you guys. Yeah. Because there's... Yeah, and if we're going to talk about it, I might as well, my initial response was I was kind of ideologically opposed to the idea of an origin story for Joker, and I actually still am, in spite of this movie. I still think my favourite version of the Joker is the one where it says Joker, real name, unknown.
Yes, unknown. And interestingly, the film kind of does that. The film does that on numerous levels. I mean, what I do love about what the film has done is that by introducing a narrator, or rather a protagonist, who is completely unreliable.
Yeah.
It's just wide open to interpretation. It's because it plays with perceptions of reality and what is potentially real and what is not. You can interpret almost everything in it from myriad different perspectives and in multiple different ways. So that can still be there. I mean, I hate talking about spoilers. I hate the notion of spoilers. But yes, we're going to be spoiling this film. We're going to assume that you've seen it. All right, it's a good film whether we spoil it or not. Okay.
Yes.
As are all good films.
I think what I would say on that actually is, if you're listening to this, you've got this far and you haven't yet seen the Joker movie, my personal recommendation would be to stop listening, go and see it, and come back when you have.
But it's still a good film. You'll be fine, okay?
But you also, you really should see this film, I think. I think this is I'm still not sure. I'm really interested in how this conversation develops, because I actually still don't know how I feel about this film, but I do know I feel very strongly about this film.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and I haven't felt that way about a work of cinema in a long time.
Certainly not a mainstream work.
No,
of cinema.
No. And I think that alone makes it worth your time. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's why. Yeah, I mean, the initial plan was that you were going to go see it on Sunday, is that right?
That's
and
right,
we were going to talk
Sunday,
about it Sunday evening, weren't we? There was that plan initially, and it was just after I'd actually seen the film, it became very clear to me that wasn't going to happen.
No, I just couldn't. I couldn't talk
you
about
can't,
it.
Can you?
I couldn't. I'm still struggling now, but I certainly couldn't have done on Sunday evening. And we were going to talk about something else then, and I couldn't do that either, because my head was just full of this movie. I mean, I said on Twitter, I think on Monday, that this film is still sitting like a ball of lead in my stomach, and it is, and it still is. I am still, 2 days out now, and I'm still spending a lot of kind of mental space churning through this damn thing. And I cannot remember the last time a bit of cinema did that to me.
Likewise, I saw it on Thursday. I went to see it directly after a long period at work, and in a very strange state of mind. I've been in a very strange state of mind for a few weeks now because of lots of different factors, and it was a great state to see it in.
Yeah,
I want to get into
that. Go on.
Everything was open, everything was kind of wounded and ripe and ready for something like this. I mean, it's a traumatizing film.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a film about trauma and is also traumatic to the audience, deliberately so, in the manner of a film like, say, Fight Club or Seven, or not just because of their violence, but because of their subject and their ethos, yeah? It's an aggressive film to its audience on a number of levels. One might even say, to a certain degree, it's an abusive film. Which is not a condemnation. I really want to emphasize that when I say things like the film is aggressive, when I say that it's kind of brutal and that it's abusive, what I'm trying to say is that it evokes states of mind, it evokes emotion, and that's what art is for.
Right. I think that's true, but I want to pick up on something else you said, though, because I think I want to join up those two things. So you were talking at the start about the critical response, and I was making the point of separating out the pre-movie critical response, which I think was almost uniformly dreadful, especially, and I hate to say it, from the left, but it was.
Yeah,
you guys
I know exactly.
Stop doing that. Stop watching a trailer and thinking you know what the movie is, because
I know exactly
you've got
what
this
you
one
mean.
badly wrong a lot, yeah.
These preemptive assaults upon the film, they've got it wrong. I know people who won't go and see the film now because of these preemptive responses, and I'm like, please don't do that.
And I'll say this, it's not that there aren't criticisms you could make of this film from the left, and I've seen criticisms of this film from the left from people who've seen it, and they've given me food for thought, and I've probably got a couple myself when I really think about it. But it's not what you thought it was.
No, definitely not.
It wasn't a good look. I've got to say.
It really wasn't. And
there's a separate wave of critical response after the film came out, though. And I think where that is interesting, because you were saying how you felt that you felt like, did we even see the same film? Because what you talk like, but I think that you hit the nail on the head when you talked about the ambiguity of the film.
Yeah.
I think the ambiguity of the film is its strength, but I also think what that means is if you view the film with a particular mindset, you will probably see what you're expecting to see in it.
I think you're probably right there. I mean, one of the things I adored about this film, above and beyond anything else, is the great breadth of space it allows for. So, it's beautifully artistic in many respects. The sequences and the scenes lack exposition. They not only lack exposition, but the film does not provide interpretation for you in any which way. It doesn't provide like a moral interpretation. It suggests things. It suggests certain political interpretations of its material, for example. It suggests certain psychological interpretations of its material, but it never makes them overt. So it leaves it up to you as the audience member. So I imagine it's almost like a Rorschach ink blot test. You know, when people come in, they are seeing so much of themselves in the film, in the characters, in whatever the hell is going on. So I imagine when you're streaming out of the cinema, you've got 100-odd people all talking about slightly different films that are going on in their memories.
Yeah, and there was an interesting thing. So we saw it. We didn't see it in the same viewing as a couple, but I'll come back to this because I want to. The story of the state of mind I was in when I sat down to watch the film, I think, is quite a fun one, and I'd like to talk about that later. But before the film, we were sitting in a restaurant with a couple who had seen it, I think, the day before.
Yeah.
And were just, almost exploding with excitement to talk to us about it, but just said, no, go see it. And we went directly to see them after we'd seen the film when we talked about it. And the thing that was incredible for them was those two, they described how immediately after coming out they had a conversation and they really felt they had seen two different movies.
Yeah.
And one member of the couple had basically not realised or not kind of internalised that any of what Flex saw was hallucination. Had actually believed all of it.
So it was all sort of literal.
Yeah,
them,
exactly.
Yeah? Interesting.
And the other member of the couple saw it almost entirely as delusion. Saw almost the entire movie as being just one long delusion.
Well, I mean, the ending sequence, when you see Fleck in the asylum, sans all of his makeup, it's just this. Well, his name isn't even Arthur Fleck, it's just this man, this nameless creature, who, when he's thinking back over the events of the film, and it's flashing back over them, and he says, "Oh, I was thinking of a joke, but you wouldn't get it." You could interpret that as a kind of joke on the audience. What he's talking about. I mean, you're supposed to it kind of frames it so you're kind of supposed to think of the death of Thomas Wayne as the joke, but that could just be the punchline. This whole film could just be the joke that he's inventing in his head, because we know that this guy has a very peculiar sense of humor.
Yeah.
The whole film could just be this elaborate joke about, ironically, his own origins, which is something that feeds into what you were talking about earlier, the notion that the Joker has no origins, or that he has multiple different origins on any given day.
Yeah, I mean, that's the killing joke, isn't it? That's the kind of text for that idea. And to be fair as well, that they used that as the source material for the Dark Knight. Ledger's Joker memorably tells at least 2 or 3 different origin stories.
Of course.
Throughout the course of the movie.
Of
And
course.
just lets you decide, are any of them true or none of them true? Is it something else?
Well, another thing this film does, if you do take some of its events literally, it leads you to make certain assumptions about the character, which it then breaks down, and you're just left with this kind of vacuum where you're like, so actually, who is he? Who is this guy? Where does he come from? Which of these is true? Like, you have the whole the backstory involving Thomas Wayne, for example.
That was absolutely astounding.
I
I thought in a film not short of astounding moments, that was in some ways one of the most astounding. From a pop culture perspective, one of the most incendiary things I think I've seen in a very long time in franchise. I put that up there with Death in the Family, with the murder of Jason Todd, as a sheer what the fuck moment. And I know they muddy the waters later on, and they create a situation where it's, I think, still ambiguous.
Oh, it's totally ambiguous. It might still be true.
When his mother says he's got a lot of money, he could fake it, you think, he could.
You're absolutely
right. And what we
right.
see of Thomas Wayne does not endear him to us at all as an audience. Now, of course, we only ever see him through Fleck's eyes, right? But still.
That's true too. So there is this massive ambiguity that, from my own sort of political and philosophical perspectives, one of the things I loved was the fact that the film dared to puncture the saintly myth of Thomas Wayne.
Oh God, it made him a villain as well.
It made him pretty much the villain. One of the complaints I've seen about this film, which I think is totally illegitimate, is that it's not about the Joker. And that's absolutely true in many respects. It is absolutely true. It's true on a textual level, for one thing. When you look at the state of Gotham in this film and what eventually transpires, the man who becomes the Joker is almost incidental. He is almost incidental.
Yeah.
The things that eventually become the symbols of the uprisings and the riots and the dissolution of Gotham, they happen by accident. They don't happen by intention. Okay, it becomes the clown mask, it becomes the clown makeup because he happens to be on his way home from a very bad day at work in his clown makeup and is forced to do something which, I suppose you could describe it as terrible. I certainly don't myself, but that becomes the incitement. That becomes the image that people latch onto. But you know what? Even that would have been incidental were it not for Thomas Wayne being a prick about it after, and calling the people of Gotham clowns, and drawing that distinction between that entirely misaligned distinction between the haves and the have-nots, where he talks about people being jealous of those that have made something of themselves. If anyone is the one who incites the riots and the violence in this culture, who sees the systems collapse as they inevitably must, then it's Thomas Wayne and the people like him. And the film makes that overt. The film makes that so overt. Fleck is just this bit of grit.
Yeah.
He's nothing, almost.
I think that's right. And actually, as I think about it, as you say that, I think even if there's at least one scene with Fleck and Wayne where they meet face to face, which could in fact entirely be delusion. There's nothing textual either way to say whether that's happened in Fleck's head or in real life. And we could, but even if you take that off the table, you're right. Even just looking at Thomas Wayne and the way he's portrayed when he's on TV and there are other people other than Fleck watching, so we've got a fairly good idea that it's real. And also, you're right, actually, more importantly, in the response of the city to what he says. So we know he said what he said. Yeah, it's an incredible portrayal of that kind of what I think of as like wealthy liberalism and the incredible limits of imagination of wealthy liberalism. Funnily enough, I'm forcibly reminded of the recent kind of Twitter storm around Ellen DeGeneres sitting down with George W. Bush,
which
and
the
not
film
understanding
almost
what the big deal is.
Yeah, it almost preempts.
Exactly.
It almost preempts, doesn't it? It almost predicted that. You've got this Thomas Wayne, who considers himself to be very liberal, to be very understanding. Oh, we're trying to help you. When he doesn't understand that he is not the man to help. He is the symptom of the sickness. Yeah.
Well, it's I mean, it's capitalism that's driving the kind of that's driving the degradation of conditions for the
Absolutely, and the
citizenry,
film
right?
makes that so overt through its ambient
Yeah,
details. Fleck is incidental. If he hadn't killed those three guys, who fucking deserved it, by the way, on that on that subway, it would have been something else. It would have been anything else.
And there's also the thing there with, I mean, what's interesting about that is the way Wayne defends them on television and says, I'm sure they were good people. I never met them personally, but
because they were of your class, Thomas.
But also he said they were in my company, so they're family to me. And there's something really, I mean, that's really explosive to me. There's something really toxic there about the notion of, that's toxic tribalism right there in a nutshell.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah, and classism for that matter. Yeah,
because we saw those guys and they were shitheads.
They were rapists. They were rapists, and they were filth, and also, I mean, Fleck's murder of them. Another thing that really needs to be drawn here is that Fleck doesn't intend to murder them. It's an accident.
No, it's impulsive, isn't it?
Yeah. It's an accident initially. I mean, he doesn't even, and they assault him. It's like, I don't fucking care. He defended himself.
I have to say, though, almost as important as that to me is the fact that before that they're hassling a woman.
Yeah.
And Fleck does nothing to intervene.
No, he doesn't.
And actually, the only reason they move away from her and onto him is because he has his involuntary laughter. So he has no control over that. That's not a scene where he uses that as a kind of thing to draw them. It's just his disability, I guess, his mental illness puts him in that position. I think
this is such a point to draw for this film.
Yeah, it's really important.
It really is important. At no point is Fleck ever in control of anything that's happening around him. He is not some sort of conscious revolutionary. He's not some sort of... there is one thing I loved about the film is it resisted the urge, because I thought they were going to do it at one point. I thought they were going to have him have some revelatory moment where he suddenly becomes massively confident and becomes the man he wants to be in his own head, as terrible as that is. And the film makes you believe that it has done it. And then it pulls it out from under you.
So clever.
It pulls it out from under you,
doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the other thing that's great about that is what that's doing is that is playing with convention. That is playing with trope. Really? That is playing with our understanding of the Joker as a character, right? Because for us, especially, I mean, people like you and me who grew up with this character as this archetype, as this incredible figure. Like, he is incredibly charismatic. He is funny in an awful way.
And composed and knows what he's doing. That's the thing. He's in control a lot of the time. Fleck never, ever is. He's never in control even of his own perceptions, of his own mind. You never know what's real. I mean, it leads you to believe that it's done exactly what I talked about earlier. After he's murdered those three men, that he somehow becomes himself because of that. And in fact, what you discover later in the film is that is a total delusion. He doesn't. It's a myth that he's made in his own mind. And he never becomes that. He never becomes that except through the eyes of other people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I really like, I know we're jumping around in terms of the movie, but I really liked, for me particularly, I liked how they handled that in the final scene. I thought that was so powerful, because that is the moment where you expect him to become... like the Ledger Joker or the Nicholson Joker even, or that kind of more archetypal. And it's just, I love the way they play that scene out where he's not.
He's just
he's got the look. He's got the look, and he's got the moves. He starts moving, and he's doing the dancing, but he's still... he's still not there.
No, he's still fundamentally a victim. He's still fundamentally just... a victim of these systems. That's what he is, and it's what the film makes so overt. He is not he's not some grand lord of the incels or whatever, which is another one of the preemptive interpretations of this film. And that's ironic, because the guys who would be the incels are the ones that he actually ends up killing. Are the ones
that was embarrassing. That was an embarrassing thing in the end, wasn't it?
He would be the victim of these kinds of people. Yeah,
that's right. And I think they really, that is the most egregious moment where I think the people judging it on the trailer kind of fucked up. And I think that's I do think that's unfortunate. I mean, as I say, there are criticisms that you could make of this movie from the leftist criticisms in terms of, I mean, I read a really interesting piece. I'm not sure I agree with it, but it made a compelling case that you could read the Joker as a kind of nascent fascist leader, actually.
Yeah.
Albeit one who's fallen into it.
Yes, I mean,
by
and
the
that's,
end of the film.
I wouldn't
the final
say
scene in particular.
I wouldn't say that's a criticism of the film. I would say that is something that is implicit in the material, and it's just one of the many interpretations you could draw from it. I mean, there is the potential for that there. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely, but that doesn't in any way undermine all of the other complexities of the film, or the criticisms that it raises of other systems. It's sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, and crucially, I think a big part of the reason why that happens, and this is something that this is an observation that came from Jack Graham rather than me on Twitter, but he said that he kept waiting for the moment when the movie made the Joker cool, and it just didn't happen.
Didn't happen, yeah.
And I think that's absolutely key, because that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And even at that end, even in that last scene, even in that moment where he stands there on top of the car and he makes a smile out of his own blood, he's still not cool, because he's not in control, he's not in charge, he doesn't, I think that's such a wonderful moment, because that's the moment his dream of being applauded and adored comes true, and it's an absolute hellscape. Yeah,
it's an awful thing, isn't it? Not only for Gotham, but for him. This is not an apex; it's a nadir.
Absolutely.
He is just a very, very, very sick man. Ultimately,
that's right.
Who's been elevated by circumstance into something that he can never be.
Yeah, and that's interesting too. Although, again, except potentially the very final scene of the movie, which suggests maybe he has become that at last.
Or maybe he's always been that, and maybe this is just a nonsense. We just don't know. It could all just be a big joke on the audience, We just don't know.
Yeah, no, that's
Again, it really does emphasize how ambiguous this film is, and it should be ambiguous. I really mistrust anyone who comes at film like this and comes out with an absolute interpretation, or as though they know what it's about, or they know what it's trying to say, or whatever, because there are just too many ideas here. There are too many ideas.
I think I would draw a distinction there. I think there's two slightly different things that can happen. I have no issue at all with people describing either their preferred reading or what they consider to be, on balance, a dominant reading. I'm actually okay with that, as long as it's qualified in that way.
Oh, totally.
But I share absolutely your suspicion for anyone who comes out of it and says this is what it's about, because it deliberately isn't about one thing.
That's it. And
really very deliberately isn't about one thing.
It deliberately introduces elements that undermines everything that you assume it's trying to tell you in almost every scene, in almost every moment. And also, just on a purely... I'm remembering it now, I'm thinking of particular scenes, and just on a purely visual level, the film is so striking. It's so strikingly beautiful. I would have enjoyed this film on a purely technical level, if nothing else.
Well, beautiful and ugly. I found that the depictions of poverty and the depictions of the crumbling city. It was New York, and it was early mid-80s New York, but it was painful. It was painful to see.
It's a hellscape. It's a suburban, it's an urban hellscape that it draws. But the framing of that, and when I say it's beautiful, I certainly don't mean on a sort of aesthetic level. But what I mean is that it's got such consistent ethos. Every scene and sequence is framed to induce this sense of not just tension, but a kind of depression.
Well, let's go back to that subway scene, because I think that's an exemplar of how this film works. The way that subway scene is shot and directed and edited is going to be studied in film school.
Yeah, I think so
because it's
too.
absolutely exquisite. the way it chooses to use, when it uses the 2-cut, when it cuts away to the long shot, the use of flickering lights inside the subway itself, the use of this flashing, so it sets up the idea of darkness and light, you know, flashing on and off at random. So of course when the gun goes off, your eyes have already been acclimatized to the flash in the dark. It just, and the way the violence itself is shot, the way the shooting is shot, I mean, it's just gobsmacking. It's absolutely incredible. And yes, on top of that, there's 4 really good performances. The 3 guys and Joaquin, who's just, I mean,
I know, right?
Holy Mother of God.
Yeah, it's an amazing performance. I mean, the physicality, if nothing else, physicality is beautiful.
Yeah, and then the scene that immediately follows that, where he runs into, he just runs and runs and runs, and eventually finds himself in this, you know, public lavatory that's straight out of Train Spotting, and he starts to dance. And again, the way that dance is shot is just, it zooms, it tracks him all the way down to his feet, and then his feet start to move, and it stays close. It moves all the way up his body, right past his face to his arms as they're kind of twirling in the air. Just amazing.
Yeah, and so absolutely easily would have been made risible in a lesser film.
Well, you know what, as well, I was thinking, I thought, kind of, as I was watching it, I was like, I thought 2 things. One is like just this whole sequence, like this is just almost too much. This is almost too amazing as a piece of cinema. But I also thought, like, this is going to be parodied to death by fucking idiots. Absolutely. And you know, this is going to be the new fucking Father Beans and a nice Chianti fucking catchphrase.
Forever and ever. For the next decade, we're going to be seeing Joker
generation of dunderhead wannabe funny guys. This is going to be the... And
it's already started, hasn't it? I mean, there's
sure.
already, like,
I've avoided it, but I'm sure you're right.
Don't get me wrong, some of the Saturday Night Live sketches are actually rather funny, but it's kind of set itself up for that. Because it is so prominent. It's so prominent and it's so big, and it does deal with issues. It deals with genuine subject matter, which is always something that, you know, comedians and whatnot will go for.
Now, I don't want to jinx us.
Have we got Jack?
I have a feeling we may have Jack Graham on the call. Am I right about that?